And good afternoon to everyone who is joining us here in this Facebook Live. My name is Gordon Mosley, News Source Guyana. And this afternoon, we're going to have an information session on those new U.S. Travel regulations. I'm quite sure we've been all hearing about them. They come into force on the 8th of November. That's just a few days away, 3 days away, in fact. Those new travel regulations with regards to vaccination will come on board. And so I have joining me today from the U.S. Embassy here in Georgetown, the Chief Consular Officer, the head of the Consular Division, Benjamin Hesbridge. I hope I got the pronunciation right. Good afternoon, sir. How are you doing?
You've got the pronunciation right. Thank you very much, Gordon. I'm well, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your program.
It's good to have you here. First of all, bring us up to date on these new travel regulations, what they mean, and what they really are.
Sure. So as you said, as of November 8th, the new travel requirements will go into effect. And for citizens of Guyana who hold a Guyanese passport, what this means is to enter the United States on a flight on or after November 8th, you will have to be vaccinated with a World Health Organization emergency use listed or a U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved COVID-19 vaccine. In addition, you have to submit a negative COVID-19 viral test 3 days in advance of your departure.
Now, I know a lot of folks here in Guyana might have gotten a vaccine that was not approved by the World Health Organization. In cases like those, is there a system that they can go through, or do they simply have to wait on that approval to come from the WHO?
There's extremely limited exceptions to the November 8th regulations. So the Biden administration made the decision based on science and based on public health. So I would refer you to the World Health Organization. Do visit their website and keep posted. They are in the process of evaluating other COVID-19 vaccines for approval. But to answer the question, if you do not yet have a WHO or US Food and Drug Administration approved vaccine, you would not be able to travel to the US at this time. There are very limited exceptions for non-immigrant visa travelers to this requirement.
Can you bring us up to date on some of those exemptions? Because I was reading, as you mentioned, there are a few limited exemptions to the rule. Help us to understand those exemptions.
So there's a variety, and the point you need to know is that they apply to a very limited pool of people. So for example, there are exceptions for diplomats, for certain air crew, for military personnel. There are humanitarian considerations available, and for people who have or had been part of very specific COVID-19 trial tests. There are processes to request those exceptions, and I would refer you to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention website, which is cdc.gov, to find out more information about how to apply for those if you are in that very limited applicant pool to qualify for those very limited exceptions.
What happens in the case of someone who may have been vaccinated with a vaccine that may not have been approved by the WHO as yet, but that person goes and gets revaccinated with a WHO-approved vaccine based on their own doctor's advice that they could be allowed to take, whether it's a Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer or one of those other vaccines? Would that be a problem?
No, that's not a problem. You are considered fully vaccinated 2 weeks after you take a US FDA or WHO-approved vaccine. So you would simply need to submit that proof to the airline in advance of your travel if you are a non-citizen, non-legal permanent resident of the United States.
So explain this to us, because based on the reading, there were some folks asking whether if a U.S. citizen has been living in Guyana for, let's say, the past year, and they were forced to take a vaccine that was available here, would that person still have to go through the same process as a non-citizen, as a visitor?
No, it's a different, so for US citizens and legal permanent residents, the vaccine requirement does not apply to them. However, there is a big incentive to be vaccinated. So for example, if a US citizen is fully vaccinated with that WHO or FDA approved vaccine, they can test within 3 days of departure. If they are unvaccinated, or as you mentioned, vaccinated with a non WHO, non US FDA approved vaccine, then they need to submit a negative COVID viral test within 1 day of departure.
And of course, as you mentioned, this all comes into force from the 8th of this month, which is, I
Correct.
think, next Monday it is.
Yes, November 8th, Monday,
From the 8th of
12,
November.
12:01 a.m.
Oh, yeah, from 1 a.m. So persons who might be in that position would need to get in before the 8th of November, I would presume, before it rolls in.
Before the 8th of November, the old rules apply, which are the testing rules. And then after the 8th, the vaccination requirement goes into effect. On the 8th, excuse me.
What about children? Because I know different countries have different rules when it comes to the vaccination of children, persons below the age of 18. What about children and these rules? Do the new rules apply to them?
That's a great question, Gordon, and we get that a lot, so happy to explain that. So children under 18 years of age are not required to be vaccinated. So for example, if a unvaccinated child is traveling with a parent who is fully vaccinated with that WHO or US FDA approved vaccine, the child may test within 3 days of departure, following the rules that apply to their parents. If a child is traveling alone and is unvaccinated, or with an adult who is unvaccinated, then the 1 day rule would apply to them. Regardless, we still encourage children who are eligible to receive the vaccine to receive it.
And it's important to note that the new rules specifically deals with arrival into the U.S. because I think some persons might believe that to exit the U.S. they have to follow the same rules. But based on my reading, these are specific to arriving in the U.S. So if someone is there and they're traveling out, then they'll have to be guided by the rules of the country that they're heading to, right?
That's absolutely correct.
So let me see if I can put up some questions from some of the folks who are listening to us right now. And we have Karina Archer. She's asking whether testing applies to both permanent residents and citizens. Whether testing applies, they don't have to get the vaccine, but they must be tested. Those who are vaccinated, if I following you clearly, those who are vaccinated, they have to provide that PCR test 3 days, or the antigen test 3 days before, instead of 2 hours. But those who are unvaccinated, it's a 24-hour window, a much shorter window. Is that correct?
A 1 day window, yes. But the answer you gave is correct. Yes, 3 days if you are vaccinated, 1 day if you are unvaccinated. But for US citizens and LPRs, the vaccination requirement does not apply. The testing requirement does. It applies to everyone.
And I know too that these rules, though they're now being applied to visitors to the United States, those with a B1, B2, and certain category of visas, what about those persons seeking permanent residence in the U.S.? Because I remember reading some time back, there was some new rules being added there, where vaccination for COVID. Yeah, sorry about that. Where vaccination for COVID becomes part of their medical examination. That's the persons who are going up there permanently.
Right. You're talking about our immigrant visa applicants, and they have had a separate process through their medical exams, which are a document that is required to be given before the issuance of an immigrant visa. There are COVID-19 vaccination requirements within that process, and those have been in place since early October. So immigrant visa holders have a separate process for getting the vaccine before they enter the United States.
And again, for those persons who are now joining us, the new U.S. rules for traveling into the U.S., they come into force on the 8th of November, and the vaccines must be either WHO approved, that's the World Health Organization, or US FDA approved. And there's a list of those vaccines. If you go to the CDC website, you get a list of those vaccines that are being accepted. You can also go to the WHO website to see which vaccines are accepted. I think of all the vaccines that are offered in Guyana, the Sputnik vaccine is the only vaccine that is still awaiting approval by the World Health Organization. But the other vaccines that are being administered here in Guyana and have been administered, AstraZeneca, Sinopharm, now Pfizer, Johnson and Johnson, those are all accepted into the United States. To follow you clearly.
That's correct. And for the updated lists, you can see there's several places. You can go to travel.state.gov, or you can go to cdc.gov, or you can go to the World Health Organization website. All of the emergency use listed vaccines and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration accepted vaccines are clearly listed.
Someone is asking, in terms of the test results for those citizens who might be in Guyana and they have to get that test, they submit those tests to the airlines, right?
That's right. The airline has responsibility for checking those tests prior to departure, and that is essentially unchanged from before. The same way you used to submit your testing to the airlines, continue to work with your individual airline carriers to submit those results. And a reminder, it is a negative COVID-19 viral test.
And again, for persons who are joining us and they're following the conversation, we're talking to people who are following it on the news source, and they're asking about the notification of these new travel arrangements. Again, this is coming down directly from the U.S. government, from the Biden administration in the U.S. So there could be no changes unless they change everything across there. And so we're going to try to pick up some questions. Oh, someone is asking, Benjamin, whether if they have an appointment at the U.S. Embassy, if there's a vaccination rule to gain access into the U.S. Embassy.
Currently, there is no vaccination rule required if you have a visa appointment. You may simply come on the day of your visa interview. We do ask, though, if you have any COVID symptoms, please let us know ahead of time, cancel or reschedule your appointment. We will try to accommodate those. We understand that the wait times for certain tourist visas are lengthy, but if you do have COVID symptoms, please do not come to the embassy. We will work with you to reschedule when you're better.
And I know that the U.S. Embassy here in Guyana serves also as the visa center for Cuba. And so you have Cubans who travel to Guyana for their visa appointments. So for those persons, once they come into Guyana, they will have to ensure, whether in Cuba or wherever, that they have a vaccine that is approved by the World Health Organization. And it's important to note, too, that once you have that vaccine, there's a 2-week gap after your final shot. In the case of those vaccines that have 2 shots, or in the case of Johnson & Johnson with 1 dose, there's that 2-week period after the vaccine for which you have to be declared fully vaccinated. So you get your second shot on the 1st of December. You can't travel before the 14th of December.
That's right. You fully vaccinated means that you have to wait that extra 2-week period in order for the vaccine to have full efficacy.
And again, as Benjamin mentioned earlier, the vaccine requirements, they do not apply to children below the age of 18. And there are also some exemptions, whether it's for medical reasons. They have a list of those exemptions on the CDC website. And I think the State Department website also has a list of those exemptions. There are very few. So you can go there to those websites for more information on that. But as we get ready to wrap up, Benjamin, the entire vaccination policy of the United States, clearly it's going to affect a lot of countries. Have you been hearing anything from topside Washington on whether they will sort of tweak this moving forward?
I've heard nothing like that yet. Obviously, the COVID-19 situation is constantly evolving, but these are the measures that are going to be in place. And again, from the Biden administration, these decisions were made with public health and science as the backbone of the decision. In short, the best way for easy compliance and for easy travel to the United States is get vaccinated. When you get vaccinated, you are, according to the Centers for Disease Control, you are 5 times less likely to contract COVID-19, and you are 10 times less likely, if you do contract it, to experience hospitalization or death. It just makes sense.
And so it makes a lot of sense to get vaccinated. Let me take 2 questions from some of our listeners. Oh, someone is asking the same question I think you answered earlier about the airlines. The airlines are responsible for checking these documents, whether it's the vaccine document or the PCR test document, right?
The airlines will take your vaccination proof and your negative COVID 19 viral test, which could be a PCR. It also could be an antigen test, as long as it is a negative viral test. So, for proof of vaccination, your vaccine card with your name, your date of birth, the dose of the vaccine you received, and the date that it was administered would be proof. Also, if you have a digital record of that, that is proof.
On a quick consular issue, I know the U.S. Embassy had scaled back its operations when the COVID pandemic started in terms of application for non-immigrant visas. Can you give us any update on that? Because we know a lot of persons who were in the process of waiting then to go in for the interview and to begin the process, they found themselves sort of, just at a sit and wait process. So what is it now? Should those persons start checking back? Is the embassy fully reopened to business in dealing with non-immigrant visas?
Well, the embassy never closed, and consular operations have been going robustly for quite some time now. So we are seeing non-immigrant visa applicants, immigrant visa applicants, in addition to our American Citizen Services customers. We are constantly looking at ways that we can safely offer more appointments and more opportunities. We know that, especially to the people of Guyana who have not seen family in quite some time, these are important trips. And we are constantly looking at how we can do that safely.
I know that is the main watchword here, safety. And as you mentioned at its very top, following the signs. So we're going to get ready to wrap up here. But again, the new U.S. rules, they come into force on the 8th of November, and you have to be fully vaccinated to enter the United States. That goes for all non-immigrant visas, persons going there, and some of them moving on to other destinations. I have a question quickly from someone else. They're asking about persons who may be in transit. If they're vaccinated with something else, if they can possibly make that quick pit stop through the U.S.
So for transit visa holders, the same regulations would apply. You would have to be fully vaccinated with that WHO or US FDA approved vaccine. Again, very limited exceptions. For example, diplomats with official type visas would be an exception. But the testing requirement, 3 days if you are fully vaccinated, 1 day if you are among those very few accepted travelers.
All right, thank you. So that person, they should have their answer there. Even if you're in transit or if you're going on to work on a cruise ship or so, you have to be fully vaccinated, because from Guyana's, in terms of Guyana and other countries, the airlines in those countries, they bear the responsibility to ensure that those documents are in order. So you wouldn't be able to even board a flight to head to the US in the first place.
And if you think you may fall into that very limited exception category, please check the cdc.gov website, and it will outline the process for how you can proceed.
All right, well, good information as usual. We were talking today with Benjamin Hesbridge. He is the Chief Consular Officer at the U.S. Embassy here in Georgetown, and so we thank him for his time being here with us this afternoon and sort of explaining the new U.S. travel regulations that are being enforced. Of course, those regulations go into force from the 8th of November, and they're very clear. You have the vaccines have to be WHO approved or approved by the U.S. FDA. Otherwise, you simply cannot board a flight to the United States. So that's where we are right now. You can go to the U.S. Embassy's website for more information. They have a very active Facebook page. You can click on the Facebook page and follow the page for more information on this. And also, you can go to the State Department website. There's also lots of information across there on these new travel regulations. So now that we know how the system will work, I know a lot of Guyanese, over 150,000 persons have been vaccinated with Sputnik vaccine, and they're still awaiting the process for that approval. So next week, we're going to have an official from the U.S. Embassy in Jamaica, and he's sort of going to guide us and take us through the process of how a vaccine moves through the WHO to emergency use, how that approval is granted, what they have to put in place for that. So next week, we'll have that discussion with someone else from the U.S. Embassy in Jamaica. But we are thanking Benjamin for being here with us this afternoon and sharing his knowledge. And so I hope that we're all better informed now on these new U.S. travel regulations. So thanks a lot, Benjamin, and have a safe and enjoyable weekend.
And everyone, please get vaccinated.
All right, have a good one.
Have a good one.